to this dialogue on the am I on now? Okay. So it's my honor to welcome you to this dialogue session on the Arctic Circle UAE Third Pole Process. The Third Pole Process is a comprehensive effort to introduce the Arctic model of collaboration to the Third Pole region. And in the interest of effective use of time, I will introduce our speakers. As we can see on the screen, the proceedings will be opened by His Excellency Olav Ragnar Grímsson, Chairman Arctic Circle, President of Iceland, 1996 to 2016, followed by Her Excellency Mariam Almheiri, UAE Minister of Climate Change and Environment. Then we will have a virtual address by Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate in the Government of Iceland, Chairman of the Arctic Council, 2019 to 2021. And then we will hopefully be joined by Sara Olsvik, International Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. She was summoned to a meeting with John Kerry this afternoon at 4 o'clock, but we will hope she will be able to join us at 4:30 or so. So with these very general introductory remarks, it's my honor to give the floor to His Excellency Olav Ragnar Grímsson.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and let me welcome you to this meeting, which is dedicated to a very important aspect of our climate journey. I have been engaged in climate cooperation for a long time, and the problem in the early decades was the lack of understanding of the impact that the melting of the glaciers and the ice had on our planet. If the ice was not melting, there basically would be no climate crisis. So in order to stop and prevent the climate crisis, we have to stop the ice from melting. And why is this important? First of all, the extreme weather patterns that we link to climate change mostly originate due to the melting of the Arctic sea ice. The rising of the sea levels is primarily caused by the melting of the huge Greenland ice sheet and Antarctica. If only a quarter of the Greenland ice sheet melts, the global rise in sea levels will be 2 meters. 2 meters. That means that almost every coastal city in the world will no longer be livable in the way we have known up to now. But up to quite recently, the global dialogue focused on the South Pole and the North Pole, Antarctica and the Arctic. But there is a third ice-covered areas in the world, with over 70,000 glaciers. That is what is sometimes called the Himalaya region and what has increasingly become to be known as the Third Pole, to emphasize that in our climate dialogue and cooperation, we have to be aware that there is a North Pole, there's a South Pole, and then there is the Third Pole. And why is the Third Pole so important? The 70,000 glaciers in the Himalayan regions. But first of all, the big countries of the world, India and China, together with Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Pakistan and others, have the major water resources coming from the Third Pole Himalaya glaciers, which sometimes has been called the water tower of Asia. All the big rivers of China and India originate in the Himalayan Third Pole glacial region. The effect on food production, energy production, even cooperation between these countries can all be traced to the significance of the glaciers in the Himalaya region. But the problem is that up to now, there has been a very limited scientific engagement in studying the fast melting of these glaciers. Although the foremost glaciologist of Asia, Yao Tandong, has predicted that in 30 years' time, by the middle of the century, half of the 70,000 glaciers in the Third Pole region will have disappeared. But whereas there is an extensive scientific cooperation in the Arctic and in Antarctica, a cross-boundary scientific cooperation in the Third Pole region has been lacking. If we go back 30 years, we faced a similar situation in the Arctic. But we have succeeded there in the last 30 years in creating fascinating models of scientific, diplomatic, and community cooperation in the Arctic. So the purpose of the Third Pole process is to bring some of the lessons and the inspirations and the models that have been developed in our part of the world to the Himalaya Third Pole regions, and co-hosted by the Climate Ministry of the United Arab Emirates. We will be hosting an Arctic Circle Forum as a part of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week in January, and then following up to the next COP, the Emirates Climate Conference in the UAE next year. But there is also another fundamental aspect. In Antarctica, there are no people, there are no states. Of course, we have an international agreement conducting the scientific research. But the Arctic and the Third Pole regions are the only ice-covered regions on our planet that have states, communities, people, indigenous cultures, as well as a fundamental impact of the melting of the ice on the states, on the people, and the communities. And hopefully later in this meeting, Sarah Olsvik, who is the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the indigenous people of the Arctic, will speak to the importance of having the indigenous voices in this dialogue. But again, I say what I started with. The melting of the ice is the key to understanding the climate challenge. And if the ice will continue to melt, the first colossal climate disaster will happen in the Third Pole region, where over 1 billion people directly living there will be impacted by the melting of the glaciers in the Himalaya Third Pole region. So time is short. There is an urgency to deal with this. And the Third Pole process has the aim to facilitate a similar cooperation between countries, between scientific communities, and between people in the Third Pole region, as we have seen in the Arctic. And hopefully thereby make the COP next year, the Emirates Climate Conference, a historical breakthrough like Paris was in 2015. And with this, I hand over the microphone to Her Excellency, the Minister, and express how honored we are to cooperate with you and your ministry in this endeavor.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I know how much this is close to your heart. The Arctic Circle, the initiative behind it is so important. And even I myself, when I first had conversations with His Excellency, I wanted to understand. I'm like, there is a North Pole, there's a South Pole, but there's a third pole. And he explained to me how big and how important this third pole is. And so many countries that are around the vicinity of the Himalayan, these are the countries that the UAE works very closely with has long-standing relationships with, and this is why this partnership between the Arctic Circle, so this is, in a way, the Arctic Circle brings the science, the experts, and the UAE is bringing the strong strategic ties with the countries related around the third pole. But what's the common issue here? It's about combating climate change. It's about stopping the melting of the glaciers. And for me, it's this process comes so in line with us as incoming presidency to next year, COP28, the Emirates Climate Change Conference. And it's really about taking this process, aligning with the countries that are in the Himalayan vicinity and really taking this process forward. And these are the countries that, in a way, as you said, Your Excellency, this matters. This is in their backyard. This is so important for them. It's important. And when I look at the numbers and you see that the ice fields contain the largest reserve of fresh water outside the polar regions, and it's the source of 10 major river systems that provide irrigation, power, and drinking water to over 1.9 billion people, and that's 24% of world's population. So this is huge when you think about it, and that's why this process is so important, and that's why this partnership is so important, because we really need to create this platform to agree on a framework with the Himalayan countries on how we can ensure to stop the glaciers melting. And I'm really looking forward, Your Excellency, to having the Arctic Circle Forum in Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week in January, where, of course, the Himalayan countries will be with us as well to come together and discuss hopefully a kind of framework that we can agree on as we move forward from Sharm el-Sheikh to the UAE next year.
Thank you very much. Now we have a virtual address by the Minister of Environment, Climate and Energy from Iceland.
I'm sorry that I'm not with you here in person now at COP27. I'm at home by doctor's orders with a broken ankle. Instead, I send you my regards from Reykjavik, the northernmost capital city of the world, to warm and sunny Sharm el-Sheikh. Indeed, it was here in Reykjavik that the third pole was discussed at the recent Arctic Circle conference in October. The challenges that the Arctic faces are in many ways similar to the challenges confronting the mountainous heart of Asia. Climate change is causing ice to retreat and glaciers to shrink. Mountain slopes become more unstable, with dangers of landslides increasing. These changes affect people's security, livelihoods, and societies. The changes are felt not only within the region, but outside them as well. All coastal regions are threatened by the melting of the Greenland glacier. Water security for a sizable part of humanity depends directly on the fate of third pole glaciers, which feed many of the great rivers of Asia. The polar regions are vital for the health of the planet, even if many see them as remote from the Earth's main centers of population. Indeed, many of the most drastic impacts of global warming will be triggered by melting ice at the poles. Science has given the frozen realm of planet Earth the name cryosphere. The changes in the cryosphere are perhaps the most visible signs of global warming and the most alarming signals we are receiving. The changes in the cryosphere will decide the fate of big parts of our planet. The message of the cryosphere should help us focus on the task ahead. Our chances of preventing the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet and the irreversible melting of the Greenland ice cap are vastly greater if we manage to keep warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius than if we reach 2 degrees or more. This fact alone should inspire us to cut emissions and work for a clean transformation of our industries and all sectors. The third pole will also be greatly helped by a focused effort to halt warming within the 1.5 degree goal. Scientists say that some mid-latitude glaciers should survive and rebound at 1.5 degrees, but will almost certainly disappear if we overshoot 2 degrees. Over 2 billion people depend on the icy mountains of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region for their water-related needs. There is much at stake here. I'm happy to see the third pole dialogue continue here at COP27. I'm also delighted to know that this discussion will be continued and given a boost by the host of next year's climate summit, the United Arab Emirates. Iceland takes a keen interest in the third pole process for the reason I have explained before, and because we see an opportunity for constructive dialogue on the third pole, in a similar way that we have built up in the Arctic region in the last few decades. I wish you good progress in this dialogue and at COP27. Thank you.
So the title of this session is Dialogue on the Arctic Circle UA Third Pole Process. And that is because the main purpose of the session is to invite questions and dialogue with the audience and those who take an interest in these issues. And so therefore, I would like to open the floor for questions that can be posed to our panelists. So.
Thank you. My name is Brad Ack, and I lead an organization called Ocean Visions, and we are also extremely interested in ice, especially Arctic ice, and now in the third pole as well. My question is, what is the process that you envision for restoring ice, or even slowing the loss, other than the political agreement of 1.5? Is that are we staking all of our hope for ice on achieving those targets, or are there any other interventions that are being considered in any place to slow down the loss and forestall the loss while we slowly balance the global carbon budget?
Well, the simple answer to your question is, unless we have a comprehensive clean energy transformation all over the world, the ice will continue to melt, with all the disastrous consequences that it will entail. And unfortunately, there is no other way, because the reason why the ice is melting is the warming of the climate. And paradoxically, the scientists have been wrong. They have been wrong. They were not right in predicting how fast the ice would melt. So the ice is melting much faster, and the climate in the Arctic and the Himalayan regions is warming much faster than was predicted by the scientists 10 or 20 years ago. So that is an additional reason for the urgency. That whereas the climate deniers want to tell you the scientists are not perhaps wrong because they're warning us about climate, the fact of the matter, the scientists were not pessimistic enough about what's happening to the ice. My second answer is there are some scientific institutions and research groups who have come forward with some proposals which we might delay or the melting of the ice. One is involved in spreading sand glass or sand made of glass on the ice sheets to slow down the melting process. But this is like letting people postpone their operation by a different lifestyle for a while. So that is why I increasingly say this whole climate challenge is in fact very simple. Unless we have a comprehensive clean energy transformation, the ice will continue to melt. And if the ice continues to melt, then the climate will be out of balance. Everything else is a detail. Everything else is a detail. And that is why I think the Emirates Climate Conference is so fascinating, because being an oil-rich country, it has also become a leader in renewable energy in the last 20 years. And it has been inspiring to see that. And the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week has been the annual forum for that. So that is why I think the cooperation between Iceland and the UAE on this issue should open people's eyes. Why Iceland, my country, and your country are cooperating on the ice, especially the Arctic and the third pole. So that's really my answer to your question.
If I could just add also something. So yeah, there's the political conversation that has to happen. We're also now pursuing a net zero pathway, all countries at a different year, and the UAE announced yesterday our net zero by 2050 pathway of how we want to get to net zero. What's also important in this process is to look at innovations. Research and development is so key here, because I think there's so much that we still, we need innovations in order to stop the melting. So we will need companies like yourselves to come on board and say, look, we have something here with this work, and the partnering countries have to have a look at this and see, does this make sense for us, does it not? We need to take a holistic approach in this. So part of the process will, of course, be as well bringing in other partners as well to have a look at how we can scale up innovations and technologies.
Thank you for that. So just one quick follow-up. We're not a company, we're a research institution, so it may take companies to actually do the scale. To your analogy about postponing an operation, I would use a similar analogy with COVID. Sometimes people get so sick with fever that they have to go on an artificial breathing mechanism. They don't live on that mechanism, but they need it to get over the fever. As you pointed out, we can't live well on the planet without Arctic ice. And there is a probability, somewhere greater than zero, that our climate action and clean energy won't arrive in time to protect Arctic ice. So that innovation is something that I would suggest we absolutely have to explore. And there are a range of possibilities. None of them are solutions. They're all just palliatives.
Yeah. Thank you
So
very
now
much.
we can welcome Sarah Olfvik to the States. She is the new international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, which is the organization of the Inuit people across the Arctic, from Alaska, Canada, to Greenland, and also into Russia. And I mentioned before the importance of the indigenous people in the Himalaya regions. So even if Dagfinnur is chairing this panel, if I can invite Sarah to come into the discussion now and share with us briefly what kind of lesson from the indigenous cooperation in the Arctic can be brought to the indigenous communities in the Himalaya Third Pole region.
Thank you so much, President Grimston, and also for the invitation to this side event at this very important COP27. The Inuit Circumpolar Council is once again here at the COP, bringing our people's voice to the discussion, to the dialogue, finding it extremely important to bring also other kinds of worldviews than we normally hear the states bringing when they have their negotiations. As you all know, the Arctic also consists of 8 very, very different nation states. And as Arctic peoples, Arctic indigenous peoples, we live across the state borders. We have worked very hard through our own diplomacy, through indigenous Inuit diplomacy to build our organizations into strong, democratic, and well-founded organizations representing our peoples so that they can sit side by side with our nations and states and governments to bring our concerns to the table. So we represent Inuit from across, as it was said, Russia, US, Canada, and Greenland. And in that way, we also represent a worldview that recognizes that climate, the ecosystem, our flora and fauna, and the resources that we live from, they don't know state borders. And what we see in the Arctic is that we are the ones that are mostly impacted by climate change. But in order to have a successful process where our voices are heard and included in decision making, it requires recognition of us, recognition of indigenous peoples as equal to all other peoples. And that is what we have also joined forces with other indigenous peoples of the world to have recognized through the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So this is a fundamental document for us and a fundamental view that we are peoples equal to all other peoples. Then as representation, that we are represented through our own institutions, our own government bodies, and different ways of representing ourselves. That can be different from people to people, and it's important that people elect their own representatives to be at the table. And by that, the third point is that we then participate directly in decision making. That makes a strong system when we are developing policies for our region, the Arctic. And that is also our recommendation for all other regions of the world to recognize that. We have a lot of cryosphere in our region. That is also the case for the Himalayan. And we recognize that there's ecosystems that influence each other. We have the cooling effect on the planet, so we say protecting the Arctic is to protect the planet. And we are very much looking forward to following the process of the third pole process and to follow how that will be implemented in the years to come with a focus on the peoples in those homelands. Qoyana.
Thank you very much. I think you can hold on. Thank you very much. There was a question over there earlier, so if we can get it.
Thank you, Excellencies, for holding this very important dialogue on third pole process. My name is Madhav Karki. I am the Climate Change and Environment Advisor to the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Nepal. Indeed, Your Excellency, time is running out for the third pole of the world. Unless the world is able to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius, as you have said, the third pole will lose 50% of the ice by 2050, and third pole losing ice means the losing of the water security. But third pole is not only rich in water resources, fresh water resources, it is also rich in biodiversity. 169 IUCN threatened species have habitat in the third pole. So therefore, my question is how the third pole process can lead to very vibrant exchange of scientific knowledge and experience, and especially the regional cooperation experience between the Arctic countries and the Himalayan countries. Because for the third pole, having net zero is critical, because it's not only the greenhouse gases which is melting the ice, but the short-lived climate pollutants, the black carbon, the methane, the ozone, the bad ozone, they are also contributing to the ice melting. So I hope that the water, energy, food security and then regional cooperation will halt the rapid melting of ice. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. So if we can invite President Grimson to comment on that. Yeah.
I thank the Minister for the technical assistance. Yeah. But thank you very much for this comment. And you are absolutely correct. There are other dimensions on biodiversity, water security, and multiple other challenges that are covered or fit into this umbrella of the third pole process. But in relation to that, I want to emphasize that we all know that the underlying question of the success of the COP process is how we engage with the rising influence of Asia in the global economy, especially the role of China and India. Without bringing China and India into the successful climate process, it doesn't matter very much what happens in my part of the world. So by emphasizing the third pole process, we are bringing home the message to India and China that this is your backyard. This is your backyard. It's not just the ice in the Arctic or in Antarctica. It's your backyard that is melting. And unless you become engaged in the global climate process, your backyard will continue to melt. Your big rivers will dry up. Your water security will be diminished. And potentially you might have military conflicts in this region. And you have smaller states like your own, Nepal, Bhutan, and others, like the Arctic has the United States and Russia and small countries like my own and the other Nordic countries. So I think one of the reasons why the Arctic model can be inspirational for the Himalayan countries is that although it has been delayed partly because of the war in Ukraine, until that war started, it was a uniquely successful model of cooperation in the last 25 years, where Russia, the United States, Canada, NATO countries, and Russia, small Arctic states and big Arctic states cooperated successfully. And in addition, as Sarah pointed out, the Inuit organized participation in the Arctic decision-making process can also be a model for bringing the Inuit people in your country, in Bhutan, in China, in India, into this process. I have to tell you, when I went to China in 2010 for the Expo meeting, I said to the leadership of China, I will come if I can visit the areas in China where the glaciers are melting. And they agreed to that. And they brought me up to a region where previously there had been 12 glaciers, but now there were 8. And when I finally arrived there with my delegation, I was received by a community of indigenous leaders in that mountainous region of China, not officials from Beijing, not the dark-suited people of the Chinese government, but the colorful costumes of the indigenous leaders. And what happened? Within an hour, a woman who was their leader started making a speech up there in the high mountains on the Chinese side of the third pole, complaining that Beijing didn't understand what was happening to the water resources and the glaciers. And all of a sudden I saw the rich contribution that the indigenous people in China and other Himalayan countries could make to this process. That is why we have Sarah here on the panel together with the minister and myself, is to remind us, yes, governments are important, but we should not forget there are people and communities who have lived there for hundreds and maybe thousands of years, and their voices have to be heard. and their experience has to be respected. And they know more about the biodiversity of this region than most of the so-called global experts.
Thank you very much. May I invite further questions from the audience? So in the middle there. So,
Thank you, Excellencies. I very enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much. So my question is for Her Excellency Mariam. So my name is Kai. I'm from Guideco. So it's about Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization. So, so as we all know that the energy sector is actually one of the key parts for decarbonization, for save the biodiversity. And so my question is for Her Excellency Mariam. So what kind of role the UAE can play in terms of energy interconnection, for example, allowing more penetration of photovoltaic, of wind energy, and of course of nuclear energy, because so UAE has demonstrated has showcased a very good example of how such kind of zero emission energy connected to the grids and sends the electricity to the neighboring countries in the GCC country, and even later on, for example, to send to the load centers in Pakistan and to some so where electricity is much needed. So that is my question, Your Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you. So the UAE has been on a journey now for nearly 3 decades on our journey to ramping up our renewables and green projects. And we're not only focused on inside the UAE, but also outside. And I think if you walk around this beautiful pavilion that we have here, you'll see a lot of the investments that we've done outside the UAE. And it really has been, in a way, our leadership saw many years ago. They said, we need to diversify our economy. We need to diversify from where we get our energy. We cannot just always rely on oil and gas. And so we've been on this journey now for nearly 30 years. And where we are today, when you look at solar energy, for example, where we started and where we are now, we're now producing solar power at the lowest cost that I've seen, at 1.32 cent per kilowatt hour. I mean, this is incredible. And this is great news as well when you now think of hydrogen, upcoming, the future fuel, green hydrogen. We already supplied our first shipments of hydrogen to Germany, for example. So this is all starting. And I really feel because of the leadership we have and because of the journey that we've taken. I mean, we set up Masdar City in 2006. Why? We wanted this catalyst to push our renewables. And now Masdar is our famous flagship company. So we have a lot of stories to tell. And what's really important that we've been on this just energy transition. It takes time, it takes money, and it takes also capacity building, because it's a new way of doing business. It's a new way of using, there are new technologies in there as well. And that's why this third pole process is so important, because we need to bring together the scientists, we need to bring together the partners. The only way we can do this is by taking the solutions that are available and accelerating our efforts. Because even though this process, I mean, we have the Arctic Circle, you have the UAE, you have the partners, the countries of the Himalayan countries. It's not about Iceland, it's not about the UAE, it's not about the Himalayan countries, it's about everybody. This touches everybody's lives. And yes, we're talking about a just energy transition. And the UAE, we're walking the talk. We're doing it as we speak. We signed with Egypt now, just 2 days ago, a 10 gigawatt offshore wind farm, I think onshore wind farm. And this just shows that the UAE is really committed and serious about this ramp up to renewables and clean energy sources. And this is one of the essential pillars of making sure that the glaciers don't melt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then there were questions over there. Please. No, Erica, you can, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Erica from New York University, Abu Dhabi. I'm also a UAE youth delegate here. I would like to learn about what are some of the next steps that UAE would like to take to engage in a third pole process.
Sorry, say that again. Next steps to engage?
In the third pole process.
Okay. So the first thing is, of course, putting wise minds together and making sure that we understand what is the main goal that we want to achieve with this third pole process. And I think we've already defined this. And what's really important is to convene the leaders of the Himalayan countries together. And this is what we hope to achieve at the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. So the days have already been set, the invitations have been sent out, and we're looking forward to having those countries together to talk about how we can build, hopefully, a framework around the third pole process. So these are the first coming steps. And of course, the journey that we as the UAE will be taking, going now from Egypt to the UAE the next 12 months, will be essential as well. So what's really important is that we need to keep reminding ourselves how important this is. We need to engage the relevant partners. We need to enlighten as well of what this actually means for our lives and for planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another question over there.
Thank you. Actually, it's not a question, it's an update from China. You know, there is I represent a climate change film festival, which has held 7th anniversary. And this year, the gold award goes to a film called The Disappearing Glacier. So maybe you are interested and reflect the serious situation in Himalaya mountain, produced by a China producer. And this afternoon, I joined an event united by the UN FCCC with partners from Hollywood and partners from UK and other countries who all focus on climate change topics. And we are planning to do more next year and see if there is any chance to explore this cooperation in Dubai.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I will show you this later on.
Yes,
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
But yeah, so this was a good update from China. But if we can invite further questions from the audience, then that would be wonderful. So, over there.
Greetings, Your Excellencies. I'm Anil Pokhriyal, and I'm the Chief Executive of Nepal's National Disaster Management Authority. Now, reflecting back on the discussions, what we see is in the third pole, especially in the Himalayas, we're seeing unprecedented and catastrophic disasters already. If there was a switch to turn off all the emissions, even then, for the next 30, 40 years, we'll see those disasters. And these disasters are happening at an unprecedented rate. Last year, on the very onset day of monsoon, we saw similar incidents where one of our dams got wiped out. These dams are under 24 meters of rubble. Scores of settlements have been wiped out. Hundreds of people are lost. Their lives are lost. Settlements after settlements are gone. This also has implications downstream in India as well, and perhaps in Bangladesh as well. I think this is where it's not a question as such, but again, building on the lessons between the 8 countries that you mentioned earlier, there are also multiple countries in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, bringing them together, understanding this complex risk, and averting these disasters requires money, requires financing. And what we see is through those platforms, through those dialogues, I think there is a need to, again, A, raise money for addressing such risks, but B, also to learn from knowledge, from expertise, from the 2 poles that we mentioned earlier. So I think this is exactly a call for action, perhaps preparing up for the upcoming COP in UAE, where we all could get together and then start working on some of these catastrophic disasters that's happening in the Himalayas. I'll stop here. Thank you.
So can you phrase this as a question for our panelists so that they can comment on this?
This is more for a call for joint collaborations and cooperations among multiple researchers, agencies, even the Arctic Circle's projects and others to work together on it.
Well, first of all, let me acknowledge the role that China has played in the last 10, 15 years in enhancing the scientific knowledge of the Himalayan glaciers. It's, however, interesting that, to the best of my knowledge, the term Himalaya doesn't exist in the Chinese language. They talk about the Tibetan plateau in a geographical sense. But the Tibetan Plateau Institute, led by Yao Tandong, has in the last 10 or 15 years become the foremost research institute of the Himalayan countries on the glaciers in the Himalaya region. And through that, they have cooperated with what's called the Third Pole Environmental Program, which has been led also by the foremost glaciologist in the United States, Lonnie Thompson, with the Ohio State University in America, as well as leading European glaciologists. Of course, during COVID, China kind of disappeared from this active cooperation, and we all understand why. So that is why we hope that at the forum in Abu Dhabi, in the light of the recent progress of COVID in China, we will again have Chinese leaders, scientific leaders, political leaders engaged in this. One can say many things about the Chinese leadership, but one thing which strikes me as interesting is the direct communication from leading scientific institutes up to the top political leadership. And the Tibetan Plateau Institute has now for over a decade been informing the Chinese leadership about what's happening. But the problem in China in bureaucratic terms is that the study of the ice in the Arctic and Antarctica is under the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Polar Institute. But the study of the glaciers and the ice in the Himalaya is under the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Tibetan Plateau Institute. So there is a bureaucratic division within the Chinese system about the ice, which has created some kind of problem for us in the Arctic Circle. But we are trying to bring both of them to the table, both the Polar Institute as well as the Tibetan Plateau Institute. And I hope you bring that message back to China. With respect to what you said about the disasters in the Himalaya region, you're absolutely correct. But like 20 years ago, there was very little attention on what was happening in the Arctic, in the diverse communities up in Canada, in Alaska, in Greenland, and other places. We now have a similar gap in awareness of what's happening to the communities up in the different Himalaya regions. One problem is they are very high up, and it's difficult to get there. So that is why part of our message is to emphasize through the role of the indigenous people in the Arctic the fundamental role that the indigenous people from the Himalayan countries can have. And if I may say so to my friends in the UAE who are planning the Emirates Climate Conference COP28 next year, one of the things we need to do is to bring indigenous voices up front on the big stage in the climate dialogue. Yes, I welcome President Biden being here yesterday. I welcome the President of France being here in the beginning. I welcome the new Prime Minister of Britain and the Secretary General of the United Nations. But we didn't have any prominent indigenous representatives on the big stage. That has to change, because these are the people who feel the climate change impact on themselves. They are the authentic voices of what's happening. So at the Arctic Circle Assembly in October in Iceland, we had both Sarah Olsvik representing the Inuits in the US, Canada, Greenland, and Russia. And we had the Prime Minister of Greenland speaking on behalf of his people. So one of the things I think the third pole process can do is to highlight and to give a stage and a platform for those people who feel the impact of the melting of the ice and the climate process on themselves in this way. And that is part of the mandate and part of the message. Whether we succeed remains to be seen. But at least we will be trying.
Thank you very much. I'm getting hints that we are already beyond our time limit. And the third pole process will be a journey for the coming months. The next destination will be in Abu Dhabi in January in conjunction with the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. And then in Tokyo, Japan in early March. And then will become an element in the preparations for COP28 taking place, or the Emirates Climate Conference taking place towards the end of next year. And with these concluding words, I thank you for your attention and to come and listen to this session.